They say the mountains never forget a debt. Neither do wolves. Mireia knew both truths intimately as she stood at her cabin's threshold, the wilderness stretching before her like an open wound. The scars on her heart matched the jagged peaks that had become her refuge, a place where broken things came to either heal or disappear entirely. She hadn't yet decided which fate she sought. 5 months of solitude had taught her the language of silence, how to breathe without making a sound, how to move through the world like a ghost, leaving no trace, how to kill the yearning for connection that occasionally stirred in her chest during the longest hours of night. But some instincts refuse to die, no matter how deeply we bury them. When the storm brought a golden-eyed cub to her doorstep, bleeding and desperate, something ancient awoke within her, a fierce protectiveness she thought had been carved out alongside everything else she'd lost. With trembling hands that remembered how to be gentle, she chose mercy when the wilderness had taught her only survival. She couldn't know that this small act of compassion would shatter the walls she'd built around herself, that saving one tiny life would irrevocably bind her to a world hidden beneath the mountain's skin, where humans with wolf souls guarded secrets older than civilization itself. By morning, her choices would be written in blood and snow, witnessed by 100 golden eyes. The mountains never forget a debt, neither do wolves, and Mireia was about to become both predator and prey. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every day, a new story awaits you. Now, let us begin. The storm howled like a wounded beast, rattling the shutters of Mireia's cabin. 3 days it had raged, trapping her inside with dwindling firewood and the constant reminder of how utterly alone she was. Outside, snow piled against the walls, a soft prison of white. Mireia stoked the dying embers in her fireplace, hands calloused from months of surviving on her own. At 32, her face had grown leaner, the softness of her former life carved away by isolation and grief. Her dark hair, once her pride, now hung in a practical braid down her back. Just a little longer, she whispered to the flames, a habit born from too much silence. Her own voice sounded strange to her ears these days. The wind screamed in response, finding new cracks in the cabin's weathered frame. Mireia pulled her threadbare sweater tighter around her shoulders. 5 months she'd lived in this forgotten corner of the mountains, and winter had proven crueler than she'd anticipated. A sharp crack echoed outside, distinct from the storm's chaos. Mireia froze, listening. There it was again. Not the wind, but something solid against wood. Someone at her door. No one knew she was here. No one had reason to come this far into the wilderness, especially during a storm like this. Mireia reached for the hunting knife she kept on the mantel, its handle worn smooth from her grandmother's hands before hers. The knock came again, more desperate this time. "Who's there?" she called, knife gripped tight. No answer, only another weak thump against the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached. Caution had kept her alive this long, but something in that pathetic knocking tugged at her. Taking a deep breath, Mireia unlocked the door and pulled it open a crack. No one. Just swirling snow and darkness. She was about to close the door when a soft whimper drew her eyes downward. There, half buried in the snow, lay a small, dark shape. A wolf cub, barely more than a few months old, its gray fur matted with ice and blood. Mireia stared in disbelief. Wolves rarely approached human dwellings, and never alone, especially not the young. Yet here was this cub, trembling on her doorstep. "Where's your mother?" she whispered, scanning the tree line for glowing eyes. Nothing but darkness and falling snow. The cub whimpered again, trying to rise on shaking legs before collapsing. A streak of red stained the snow beneath it. Mireia hesitated. Taking in a wild animal was foolish, dangerous even. But leaving it to die seemed crueler somehow. "I must be losing my mind," she muttered, setting the knife aside and kneeling. The cub growled weakly as her hands approached, showing tiny teeth in defiance despite its state. I know. I'm not thrilled about this either," Mireia said softly, "but you'll die out here." Carefully, she scooped the cub into her arms, surprised at how light it was. It struggled briefly before going still, too exhausted to fight. Up close, she could see the wound on its hind leg, a clean slice, too precise to be from another animal. A trap, perhaps, or worse, a deliberate cut from a hunter's blade. Mireia carried the cub inside, kicking the door shut behind her. The warmth of the cabin seemed to revive the animal slightly. its golden eyes flickering open to regard her with suspicion. "Those eyes," Mireia whispered, startled by their unusual color. Most wolf cubs had blue eyes that gradually changed to yellow or amber, but this one's eyes were a deep, burnished gold, almost metallic in their intensity. She set the cub down on a blanket near the fire and fetched water and what few medical supplies she had. The wound wasn't deep, but had bled considerably. Gently she cleaned away the dried blood, speaking softly as she worked. "This might sting," she warned, applying a homemade salve of herbs she'd learned to make from her grandmother, the family's healer before everything fell apart. The cub snapped at her fingers, surprisingly quick despite its weakened state. "I'm trying to help you, you ungrateful little beast," Mireia scolded, though there was no real anger in her voice. Something about the cub's defiance struck a chord in her, that desperate fight to survive against overwhelming odds. Once the wound was cleaned and wrapped in strips of clean cloth, Mireia offered the cub water in a shallow bowl. It eyed her suspiciously before lapping at the water with desperate thirst. "Food next," she said, rummaging through her meager supplies. She found some dried venison, softened it in warm water, and offered a small piece. The cub sniffed cautiously before snatching the meat from her fingers, devouring it in 2 quick bites. "Hungry, aren't you? Wonder how long you've been out there." Mireia fed the cub a bit more, careful not to give too much at once. "And where is your pack?" As if in answer, a distant howl rose above the storm, so faint she almost missed it. The cub's ears pricked forward, its body suddenly tense. Mireia moved to the window, peering into the darkness. Wolves were common in these mountains, but they rarely ventured so close to human dwellings, even one as isolated as hers. Another howl, closer this time, and different from the first, a deeper, more resonant call that seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the cabin. The cub whimpered in response, attempting to stand on its injured leg. "Easy there," Mireia soothed, returning to the cub's side. "You're in no shape to go anywhere tonight." She spent the night by the fire, the cub curled reluctantly at her side. Every few hours, distant howls echoed through the mountains, and each time, the cub responded with soft whimpers. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world outside transformed into a crystal landscape of untouched white. Mireia woke stiff and cold, the fire reduced to embers. The cub was gone from her side. Panic flared through her as she searched the small cabin, finally spotting the cub attempting to reach the latch on the door, standing precariously on its hind legs. "Not so fast," she said, scooping up the struggling animal. "Let me check that leg first." The wound looked better in the morning light. The bleeding stopped, and the swelling reduced. The cub seemed stronger, too, fighting her grip with renewed vigor. "I understand you want to go home," Mireia said, stroking its fur despite its attempts to nip at her fingers. "But there's something strange about that cut. Someone hurt you deliberately, and they might still be out there." The cub stilled at her touch, those golden eyes regarding her with an intelligence that seemed almost unnatural. For a moment, Mireia felt a strange connection, as though the animal understood her words. A sharp crack outside broke the moment. Mireia set the cub down and moved cautiously to the window, peering through frost-rimmed glass. 3 men stood at the edge of the clearing, rifles slung across their backs, heavy coats dusted with snow. Hunters. Mireia's stomach tightened. She hadn't seen another human since arriving at the cabin months ago, and these men were strangers. She watched as one gestured toward her cabin, his breath clouding in the frigid air. They hadn't spotted her yet, but their presence couldn't be coincidence. Behind her, the cub growled, a sound surprisingly fierce from such a small creature. It had crawled under the table, golden eyes fixed on the door, body trembling not with fear, but with rage. "They're looking for you, aren't they?" Mireia whispered, realization dawning. The deliberate cut, hunters in the wilderness during a storm. They must have captured the cub, and it had somehow escaped. One of the men pointed to tracks in the snow, the cub's, leading directly to her door. They began approaching the cabin. Mireia moved quickly, scooping up the growling cub and hushing it gently. "We need to hide you." She looked around the small cabin desperately. There weren't many options. Finally, she tucked the cub into a storage chest, lined with old blankets. "Stay quiet," she whispered, closing the lid just enough to hide the animal while still allowing it air. The knock, when it came, was heavy and demanding, and Mireia straightened her clothes, tucked loose strands of hair behind her ears, and opened the door with feigned casualness. "Can I help you?" she asked, keeping her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. The man in front, tall, broad-shouldered, with a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, smiled without warmth. "Apologies for the intrusion, ma'am. Didn't expect to find anyone living this far up the mountain." "Well, here I am," Mireia replied, not stepping aside to invite them in. "What brings you up here during winter?" The scarred man exchanged glances with his companions. "We're tracking an animal. Wolf cub, young one. Escaped from us during the storm yesterday." "A wolf cub?" Mireia raised her eyebrows, hoping her face betrayed nothing. "Why would you be hunting a cub?" "Research purposes," the man said smoothly. "We're wildlife biologists. That particular cub is part of a study we're conducting." Lies. Mireia had grown up in a family of healers who worked closely with the local wildlife authorities. No legitimate research involved deliberately wounding animals or hunting them during blizzards. "Haven't seen any wolves around here," she said. "Just me and the storm for the past few days." The scarred man's eyes narrowed slightly. "Mind if we take a look inside? The tracks lead straight to your door." "Those would be mine," Mireia said. "I had to clear a path to get firewood this morning." "Ma'am," the man began, his tone hardening. "I live alone up here for a reason." Mireia cut him off. "I value my privacy. Unless you have a warrant or some official documentation for this research of yours, I'd prefer you respect that." The three men exchanged glances again, something dangerous flickering in their eyes. The scarred man's hand moved subtly toward his rifle. "Perhaps we can make this worth your while," he suggested. "That cub is valuable to us. There'd be a reward for information leading to its recovery." A small thump came from the storage chest, barely audible. Mireia coughed loudly to cover the sound. "Sorry, gentlemen. Can't help you." She began closing the door. "Good luck with your search." The scarred man's boot shot out, stopping the door. "I don't think you understand the situation, ma'am. That cub..." A howl cut through the crisp morning air, closer than any Mireia had heard during the night. It was answered immediately by another, then another, until the mountains seemed to vibrate with them. The color drained from the scarred man's face. His foot withdrew from the doorway. "We'll be on our way then," he said tersely. "But this isn't over. Think about our offer." Mireia shut the door firmly, heart racing as she watched through the window. The three men retreated quickly, constantly glancing toward the tree line as they disappeared into the forest. Only when they were out of sight did Mireia release the breath she'd been holding. She rushed to the storage chest and lifted the lid. The cub looked up at her, golden eyes gleaming. It made no move to escape as she lifted it out, examining its bandaged leg. "They weren't researchers, were they?" Mireia murmured, scratching behind the cub's ears. "What are you? Why are you so important to them?" The cub leaned into her touch, a gesture so trusting it made her throat tighten unexpectedly. After months of solitude, the simple connection was overwhelming. "We should give you a name," she said softly. "I can't keep calling you Cub." The animal blinked up at her, as if considering the proposal. "How about Oro, for those golden eyes of yours?" The cub, Oro, tilted its head, then nipped gently at her fingers, which Mireia took as acceptance. Outside, the howling had stopped, but Mireia felt certain the wolves were still there, hidden among the trees, watching, waiting. She spent the day strengthening her defenses as best she could, covering windows, securing the door. Though the hunters had retreated, their threat lingered. Oro followed her around the cabin, hopping awkwardly on 3 legs, growing more confident as the hours passed. By evening, the cub was exploring every corner of the cabin, sniffing curiously at Mireia's few possessions. Its recovery seemed almost miraculous. What should have taken days was happening in hours. As darkness fell, Mireia built up the fire and prepared a simple meal for herself, sharing some of her precious meat with Oro. The cub ate with better manners than before, watching her with those intelligent golden eyes. "You should be with your pack," Mireia told it as they sat before the fire. "I'll help you find them once you're stronger and those men are gone." Oro yawned, showing sharp little teeth, then curled up beside her, closer than the night before. Something about the gesture broke through the careful walls Mireia had built around her heart. She stroked the cub's soft fur, tears blurring her vision. "I had a family once too," she whispered. "They're gone now." Oro looked up at her, as if sensing her sadness. The cub shifted closer, pressing against her side with unexpected warmth. Outside, A single howl rose into the night sky, closer than ever before. Oro's ears pricked forward, but the cub made no move to leave Mireya's side. As Mireya drifted to sleep that night, the cub curled against her. She felt less alone than she had in months. Whatever tomorrow would bring, at least she had found this small connection in the wilderness she had chosen as her refuge. The howls continued through the night, a mournful chorus that seemed to circle the cabin. Each time Mireya woke, she found Oro watching the door, golden eyes reflecting the dying firelight, waiting. Dawn broke with eerie silence. No birds sang, no wind rustled through the pines, just stillness, as if the mountain itself held its breath. Mireya woke with a jolt, instantly aware something was wrong. Oro was gone from her side. "Oro?" she called, scanning the cabin. Relief washed over her when she spotted the cub at the window, front paws propped against the sill, staring intently outside. Mireya joined him, peering through frosted glass. Her breath caught in her throat. Tracks crisscrossed the snow around her cabin. Wolf tracks, dozens of them, circling the small structure like ripples in a pond. But the wolves themselves had vanished with the night. "Your family was here," she whispered to Oro, who whined softly in response. The tracks told a story Mireya couldn't fully read. Some approached within feet of her door before turning away. Others formed perfect circles around the cabin, as if sentries had been posted. It wasn't normal wolf behavior. It was deliberate, almost human in its precision. Oro scratched at the door, eager to be out. "Not yet," Mireya said firmly. Those hunters could still be around. The cub growled in frustration, but relented, limping back to the fireplace. The wound was healing remarkably fast. By Mireya's estimation, what should have taken weeks was progressing in days. She built up the fire and prepared a meager breakfast, mind racing. The hunters worried her. Men like that didn't give up easily, especially when there was money involved. And what exactly did they want with Oro? The cub was unusual, certainly. Those golden eyes and remarkable healing abilities weren't typical, but valuable enough to track through a blizzard. A sharp crack outside interrupted her thoughts. Mireya froze, listening. Another crack. Then the unmistakable sound of footsteps crunching through snow. Oro bristled, hackles rising as a low growl rumbled from his chest. The cub positioned himself between Mireya and the door, stance protective despite his small size. "Quiet," Mireya whispered, reaching for her knife. She moved silently to the window, careful to stay hidden as she peered outside. The scarred hunter from yesterday stood at the edge of the clearing, rifle ready. His companions spread out, flanking the cabin. They moved with practiced efficiency, communicating with hand signals. Mireya's heart hammered against her ribs. There was no way out. The cabin had only one door, and the windows were too small for her to squeeze through. She was trapped. Oro snarled louder, his golden eyes fixed on the door. "Shh," Mireya urged, mind racing. She couldn't fight 3 armed men, but perhaps she could reason with them. Offer them something else. Anything to make them leave. A sharp whistle cut through the air. A signal. The men began closing in. Mireya made a decision. Scooping Oro into her arms despite his protests, she hurried to the back of the cabin. A loose floorboard concealed a small space beneath, barely big enough for the cub. "I need you to stay here," she told Oro, trying to lower him into the hiding spot. The cub struggled, nipping at her hands. "Please," Mireya begged. "I'll keep them away from you." Whether it was her tone or some deeper understanding, Oro finally stilled, allowing her to place him in the cramped space. Mireya replaced the floorboard, just as a heavy fist pounded on the door. "Open up," the scarred man called. "We know you're in there, and we know you have the cub." Mireya straightened, took a deep breath, and moved to the door. Her knife was tucked in her belt, hidden beneath her sweater, a last resort. "What do you want?" she called through the door. "You know what we want," came the reply. "The cub. Hand it over and we'll be on our way." "There's no cub here," Mireya insisted. "I told you yesterday." "Enough games," the man snapped. "Open this door, or we'll break it down." As if to emphasize the point, something heavy thudded against the wood, making the hinges creak. They would be inside within minutes. Mireya unlocked the door and stepped back, hands raised in a gesture of compliance. The scarred man entered first, rifle aimed at her chest, eyes cold. "Search the place," he ordered his companions without looking away from Mireya. The two other men pushed past, ransacking her small home with brutal efficiency. They overturned furniture, emptied storage chests, tore apart bedding. "I told you there's no cub here," Mireya said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "What do you even want with it? It's just a baby wolf." The scarred man's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That's no ordinary wolf, lady. Surely you've noticed. I don't know what you're talking about. Those eyes," he said, watching her closely. "Golden, like sunrise. And how fast it heals. You bandaged it, didn't you? Probably already good as new." Mireya kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced. How did he know these details? What else did he know about Oro? "Boss!" one of the men called from the back of the cabin. "Got something here." Mireya's blood ran cold as the man gestured toward the loose floorboard. He must have noticed it during his search. The scarred man's eyes gleamed. "Move aside," he ordered Mireya, shoving her roughly against the wall. She stumbled, hand automatically going to the knife at her belt. The scarred man noticed the movement and struck quickly, backhanding her across the face. Mireya tasted blood as she hit the floor. "Check under there," the scarred man commanded, keeping his rifle trained on Mireya. The third hunter pried up the floorboard. "Empty," he reported, confusion evident in his voice. Impossible. Mireya had put Oro there herself, minutes ago. There was no way the cub could have escaped. The scarred man cursed, grabbing Mireya by the arm and hauling her to her feet. "Where is it?" he demanded, shaking her. "Where did you hide it?" "I don't have your cub," Mireya insisted, wincing at his grip. "Let go of me." His fingers dug deeper. "You're lying. Those tracks led straight here. The cub never left." "Maybe it did," she countered, "while you were fumbling around in the forest. Did you think of that? Wolves aren't stupid." Doubt flickered across the scarred man's face. He gestured to his companions. "Check outside. Look for fresh tracks." While the other men hurried out, he kept his grip on Mireya's arm, studying her with cold calculation. "What's a woman like you doing out here all alone anyway?" he asked, his tone shifting to something equally threatening but more personal. Mireya met his gaze steadily. "None of your business." "Running from something? Or someone?" He smirked. "People who come this far into the wilderness usually have something to hide." Before Mireya could respond, one of the men burst back through the door, face pale. "Boss, we got company." The scarred man frowned. "What kind of company?" "Wolves," the man replied, voice tight with fear. "Dozens of them. They've surrounded the clearing." The scarred man dragged Mireya to the window. What she saw stole her breath. Wolves stood at the edge of the tree line. Massive timber wolves with thick winter coats, some gray, some nearly black, some white as the snow they stood upon. They formed a perfect circle around the cabin, silent and still, watching with unblinking eyes. Leading them was the largest wolf Mireya had ever seen, a silver-gray male with shoulders that stood as high as a man's waist. Even from a distance, she could see his eyes, golden, like Oro's, but burning with a fierce intelligence that sent shivers down her spine. "The Alpha," the scarred man whispered, his grip on Mireya's arm slackening in shock. "It can't be." The great wolf threw back his head and howled, a sound so powerful it seemed to shake the very foundation of the cabin. One by one, the other wolves joined, creating a chorus that made Mireya's chest vibrate with its intensity. The scarred man cursed, releasing Mireya and backing toward his companions. "Get your gear. We're leaving." "What about the cub?" one of the men asked. "Forget the cub," the scarred man snapped. "That's the king out there. You want to die today? King?" Mireya frowned. An odd way to refer to an alpha wolf, even one as impressive as the silver beast outside. The men gathered their supplies with frantic haste. The scarred man turned to Mireya one last time. "This isn't over," he promised, his voice low. "We'll be back, with more men. That cub is worth a fortune, and no pack, not even his, will keep us from it." With that, they slipped out the back door, circling wide to avoid the wolves watching from the trees. Mireya sank to the floor, legs suddenly too weak to support her. Outside, the howling stopped. The silence that followed was almost worse, pregnant with anticipation. "Oro?" she called softly, scanning the cabin. Where had the cub gone? How had it escaped from beneath the floorboard? A soft whine answered her. Mireia turned to see Oro emerging from beneath her bed, golden eyes wide and alert. "How did you—" she began, then shook her head. It didn't matter. He was safe. Oro limped to her side, nuzzling against her hand. The gesture was so gentle, so at odds with the fierce protectiveness he'd shown earlier, that Mireia felt tears well in her eyes. "Your family's out there," she told him, stroking his fur. "They've come for you." The cub gazed up at her, then toward the door. He seemed torn, looking between Mireia and the exit as if unable to decide. "It's okay," she assured him, though her throat tightened at the thought of losing her only companion. "You should go home." Oro whined again, pressing closer to her side. For a moment, they sat together in silence, the cub's warmth a comfort against the chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Finally, Mireia stood, wincing at the bruises forming where the scarred man had gripped her arm. She moved to the door, Oro following at her heels. Taking a deep breath, she opened it. The wolves still stood in their circle, watching. None made a move toward the cabin, though many shifted restlessly at the sight of the door opening. The silver alpha took a single step forward, golden eyes fixed not on Oro, but on Mireia herself. There was something in that gaze, an assessment, a judgment, that made her feel strangely exposed, as if the great wolf could see into her very soul. Oro limped past her, pausing at the edge of the porch. The cub turned back, looking up at Mireia with those matching golden eyes. Something passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. Then Oro bounded down the steps, his injured leg barely slowing him as he raced across the snow toward the alpha. The great wolf lowered his massive head, touching noses with the cub in what seemed a gesture of recognition, perhaps even affection. One by one, other wolves approached, sniffing at Oro, touching him with their noses or tongues. It was a reunion, Mireia realized. A family welcoming home its lost child. The alpha raised his head, once more fixing those golden eyes on Mireia. He made a sound low in his throat, not a growl, but something more complex. Then, to her astonishment, he bowed his head, a gesture so deliberate it could not be misinterpreted. The other wolves followed suit, lowering their heads in unison. "They're thanking me," Mireia thought, wonder and disbelief mingling in her mind. Wolves didn't behave this way. Not ordinary wolves. But nothing about Oro or his pack was ordinary. The alpha straightened, gave one last look at Mireia, then turned and loped into the forest. The others followed, Oro trotting between two larger wolves, occasionally glancing back at the cabin. Soon, they had all disappeared among the trees, leaving nothing but tracks in the snow to prove they had ever been there at all. Mireia stood in the doorway long after they'd gone, an emptiness settling in her chest. For a brief moment, she'd had a purpose again, someone to care for, to protect. Now she was alone once more, with nothing but the silence of the mountains and the memories of golden eyes. Inside, she surveyed the damage the hunters had done to her small home. It would take days to put everything back in order. She began methodically, pushing aside thoughts of Oro, of the hunters, of the strange alpha with his knowing gaze. By nightfall, she had restored some semblance of order to the cabin. Exhausted, she collapsed onto her bed, every muscle aching from the effort. Sleep eluded her. Each creak of the cabin, each whisper of wind, had her reaching for the empty space beside her, where a small, warm body had curled just the night before. "Pull yourself together," she muttered into the darkness. "He's where he belongs." But the emptiness persisted, a hollowness in her chest that felt all too familiar. She'd come to these mountains to escape that feeling, to find solitude rather than loneliness. Now she'd tasted connection again, however brief, and its absence was a fresh wound. Mireia drifted into an uneasy sleep, dreams filled with golden eyes and men with scarred faces. She woke several times, certain she'd heard a wolf's howl, only to find silence pressing against the cabin walls. The hunter's threat lingered in her mind. They would return, with more men, more weapons, and they would find her here, alone and vulnerable. Perhaps it was time to move on. She'd come to these mountains seeking escape, not conflict. There were other remote places, other wildernesses where she could disappear. The thought should have brought relief. Instead, it felt like another loss, another retreat. Dawn was breaking when Mireia finally surrendered to wakefulness. She rose, built up the fire, and began gathering her few possessions. If she was going to leave, better to do it before the hunters returned. A sound outside stopped her, the crunch of footsteps in snow. Mireya's heart raced as she reached for her knife. Had they returned so soon? She moved silently to the window, peering carefully through frost-rimmed glass. What she saw made her knife clatter to the floor. A man stood in the clearing before her cabin, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in clothing that seemed too light for the winter chill. His hair was silver gray, falling to his shoulders in a wild mane, but it was his eyes that held her frozen in place, golden, burning with the same fierce intelligence she had seen in the alpha wolf. Behind him, more figures emerged from the trees, men and women, all watching the cabin with the same intense focus the wolves had shown the day before. Mireya backed away from the window, mind reeling. Who were these people? Where had they come from? There were no settlements for miles in any direction. A knock sounded at her door, firm, authoritative. Mireya stood rooted to the spot, unable to move, to breathe. The knock came again, followed by a voice, deep and resonant. "Mireya," the voice called, her name sounding strange in the stranger's mouth. "We need to talk." How did he know her name? She hadn't told anyone since arriving in the mountains, had spoken to no one until the hunters appeared. The voice came again, softer this time, but no less compelling. "Please, it's about Oro. Oro, the cub." This man knew about Oro. Moving as if in a dream, Mireya crossed to the door. Her hand hovered over the latch for a moment before she summoned her courage and pulled it open. The man stood on her porch, closer than she'd expected. This near, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the proud set of his jaw. He was older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his early 40s, but carried himself with the vitality of youth. "Who are you?" Mireya demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "And how do you know my name?" The man's lips curved into a slight smile, revealing teeth that seemed just a bit too sharp for comfort. "My name is Kieran," he said, his voice matching the deep timbre she had heard through the door. "And I know many things about you, Mireya, just as you now know something about my son." "Your son," Mireya repeated, confusion creasing her brow. "I don't understand." Kieran's golden eyes, so like Oro's, so like the alpha wolf's, regarded her with a mixture of amusement and something more complex. "I think you do," he said quietly. "Or at least, you've begun to suspect." He raised his hand, palm up, an offering rather than a demand. "Come with me. There's much to discuss, and little time before those hunters return." Mireya hesitated, glancing past him to where the others waited at the edge of the trees. Men and women, perhaps 30 in all, watching with the same intense focus she had seen in the wolves. A cold certainty settled in her stomach. "Impossible," her mind protested. Yet the truth stood before her, golden-eyed and waiting. "You're," she began, unable to form the words. "Wolves," Kieran finished for her. "Yes, shifters to be precise. And you, Mireya, have saved the life of our prince." Mireya's world had narrowed to the crunch of snow beneath her boots, and the broad back of the man, the wolf, walking ahead of her. Kieran moved with preternatural grace through the forest, never breaking stride even in the deepest drifts. Behind them, a dozen shifters followed in silent procession. The rest had melted away into the trees at some unspoken command, presumably to stand guard against the hunter's return. Mireya's mind raced, struggling to process everything Kieran had told her. Shifters, humans who could transform into wolves at will, a hidden society with its own laws, territories, and royalty. And Oro, not just any cub, but the Alpha King's youngest son, stolen by hunters who knew exactly what he was. They wanted him for his blood, Kieran had explained grimly as they set out from her cabin. Shifter blood has properties, healing abilities, enhanced strength, longevity. A prince's blood even more so. They were going to kill him? Mireya had asked, horror tightening her throat. Kieran's expression had darkened. Worse. They intended to keep him alive, harvesting his blood indefinitely, a living well of power to sell to the highest bidder. The thought made bile rise in Mireya's throat. She quickened her pace, eager to see for herself that Oro was truly safe. They had been walking for nearly an hour, climbing steadily higher into the mountains, when Kieran paused at the crest of a ridge. Below them, nestled in a valley sheltered from harsh winds, stood a settlement unlike any Mireya had seen before. Stone buildings with thatched roofs formed concentric circles around a central structure, a great hall that gleamed with what looked like amber windows. Smoke rose from dozens of chimneys, carrying the scent of cooking fires and home. "Wolf's heart," Kieran said, a note of pride in his deep voice. "Our home for generations." Mireia stared, speechless. An entire community, hidden in the mountains she'd thought she knew. How had she never stumbled upon it during her months of solitary exploration? "We protect our borders well," Kieran said, as if reading her thoughts. "Few humans have ever laid eyes on Wolf's heart." "Why show me?" Mireia asked, finding her voice at last. Kieran turned to face her, golden eyes serious. "Because you saved my son, at great risk to yourself. Such a debt cannot be ignored." He gestured for her to follow as he began descending into the valley. The shifters behind them spread out, some dropping to all fours and shifting into wolf form, with a fluid grace that left Mireia breathless. As they approached the settlement, people emerged from homes and workshops to watch them pass. Their curious gazes followed Mireia, some suspicious, others openly grateful. "Word travels fast in a pack," Kieran commented, noticing her discomfort at being the center of attention. "They all know what you did for Luca." "Luca?" "My son's true name, though I understand you called him Oro." A small smile touched Kieran's lips. Fitting, for his eyes. They reached the central hall, its doors carved with intricate wolves running in a never-ending circle. 2 guards stood at attention, bowing deeply as Kieran approached. Neither questioned the human woman at his side, though their nostrils flared slightly, taking in her scent. Inside, the hall was warmer than Mireia had expected, heated by a massive hearth at its center. The air smelled of wood smoke, herbs, and something wilder, the scent of wolves in human form. Tapestries depicting hunts and transformations hung from the walls, and long tables lined the sides of the room, ready for communal meals. At the far end, a woman sat beside a small bed, gently stroking the head of a child who lay sleeping. As Mireia approached, her breath caught. The child was a boy of perhaps 5 or 6 years, with a shock of silver-gray hair like Kieran's. His face, peaceful in sleep, bore the unmistakable features of royalty: high cheekbones, strong jaw, and long lashes that shadowed his cheeks. "Luca," Kieran said softly. The woman looked up, her eyes the same burning gold as her husband's and son's. She was beautiful in a fierce way, with sharp features and an air of barely contained power. "Queen," Mireia thought instantly, straightening under the woman's appraising gaze. "Is this her?" the woman asked, her voice melodious despite its edge. Kieran nodded. "Mireia, this is my mate, Nara, my queen." Nara rose with fluid grace and approached Mireia. Without warning, she took Mireia's hands in hers, examining the small cuts and scrapes from her struggle with the hunters. "These hands saved my son," she said, emotion thickening her voice. "I will never forget that." Before Mireia could respond, a small voice called from the bed. "Father?" Luca, Oro, was awake, golden eyes bright as he sat up eagerly. The boy's gaze swept the room, landing on Mireia with a spark of recognition that made her heart leap. "Mireia!" he cried, joy suffusing his young face. "You came!" Mireia blinked, momentarily disoriented. The voice was different, higher, more childlike than she expected, but the eyes were unmistakable, the same golden eyes that had watched her from the wolf cub's face. Luca," she stammered. "You're a boy." Luca grinned, revealing slightly too sharp canines. "I couldn't shift back," he explained eagerly. "The bad men put something in me to stop it, but Father fixed it." Nara stroked her son's wild hair. "Wolfsbane," she explained to Mireia. "A poison that temporarily prevents shifting. The hunters used it to keep him trapped in wolf form. That's why he was healing so slowly," Mireia realized. "I thought it was the injury, but it was the poison," Kieran confirmed. "Had you not found him when you did, he might have died from it. Our healers were able to purge the last of it from his system once he returned to us." Luca scrambled from the bed, ignoring his mother's protests, and ran to Mireia, wrapping small arms around her waist. "I knew you'd come," he said, face pressed against her stomach. "I told Father you were good." Mireia's throat tightened as she returned the embrace, overwhelmed by the child's trust. She had grown attached to the wolf cub, certainly, but this was different. A human child, looking at her with such open affection. "I wanted to stay with you," Luca continued, looking up at her earnestly. "But Father said I had to come home first. He said the bad men might come back. Your father was right, Mireya said gently. You belong with your family. But you're alone, the boy protested. Who will protect you from the bad men? The question hung in the air, uncomfortably perceptive. Kieran and Nara exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them. Mireya, Kieran began, his tone formal once more. We owe you a life debt for saving our son. In our tradition, such a debt can only be repaid in kind. There's no debt, Mireya insisted. Anyone would have done the same. Nara's expression turned fierce. They would not, she said flatly. Most humans would have killed a wolf cub on sight, or left it to die. Others might have saved it only to cage it. You sheltered him, healed him, and faced armed men to protect him. Kieran nodded in agreement. You have proven yourself a friend to our pack. Such friends are rare among humans, and highly valued. What I'm trying to say, Mireya said, uncomfortable with their gratitude, is that I don't need repayment. I should return to my cabin before the hunters. No, Luca interrupted, tightening his grip on her. You can't go back. The bad men know where you live now. The boy's words struck her with their simple truth. The hunters had threatened to return, and they would. Even if she could defend herself, they would eventually overwhelm her through numbers alone. Kieran placed a hand on his son's shoulder. Luca is right. It isn't safe for you there anymore. Then I'll go somewhere else, Mireya said, though the thought of starting over again, finding another remote cabin, rebuilding her solitary life, suddenly felt hollow. Or, Nara suggested, her golden eyes intent, you could stay with us. Mireya stared at the queen, certain she had misheard. Stay? Here? In Wolf's Heart? Kieran nodded. We have never extended such an invitation to a human before, but for the one who saved our prince, we would make an exception. I don't know what to say, Mireya stammered, overwhelmed by the offer. I came to the mountains to be alone, to run, Nara finished for her, her perceptiveness startling, just as our ancestors did when humans hunted them. But running only takes you so far. Eventually, you must find your pack. The words struck a chord deep within Mireya, touching a loneliness she had tried to deny for months. Her gaze drifted to Luca, who looked up at her with hopeful golden eyes. I need time to think, she said finally. Kieran inclined his head. Of course. You'll stay tonight as our honored guest. And tomorrow, whatever you decide, we will respect it. A young woman appeared at Kieran's gesture, ready to show Mireya to guest quarters. Luca was reluctant to release her, but eventually agreed when Mireya promised to see him again before making any decision. The room she was given was small but comfortable, with a bed covered in thick furs and a window overlooking the valley. As the sun set, Mireya watched the community of Wolf's Heart come alive with evening activities, children playing in the snow, hunters returning with game, elders gathering to share stories around outdoor fires. It was nothing like the solitary existence she had carved out for herself, yet something about it called to a part of her she had thought long dead. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting a servant with dinner, she was surprised to find Nara standing there, a steaming mug in her hands. May I come in? The queen asked, her fierce demeanor softened slightly. Mireya nodded, stepping aside. Nara entered, offering the mug, a rich herbal tea that smelled of pine and honey. This helps with bruising, she explained, gesturing to the marks on Mireya's arm where the hunter had gripped her. I thought you might need it. Thank you, Mireya said, taking the tea gratefully. An awkward silence fell as both women took seats by the small fireplace. Finally, Nara spoke. Kieran told me you live alone, that you came to the mountains to escape something. Mireya stiffened. I value my privacy, as do we all, Nara agreed. But there is a difference between privacy and isolation. One feeds the soul, the other starves it. With all due respect, you don't know anything about me. The queen's golden eyes reflected the firelight. I know you've suffered a great loss. I can see it in the way you hold yourself, as if expecting the next blow to fall at any moment. Mireya looked away, uncomfortable with being so easily read. My past is my own. Indeed, Nara said softly, but your future need not be shaped solely by what came before. She rose, moving to the window to gaze out at the community below. Do you know why we live in these mountains, hidden from human eyes? It isn't just fear of persecution, though that is real enough. It's because wolves understand that survival depends on the pack. Alone, A wolf is vulnerable. Together, we are strong. Mireia remained silent, but Nara's words echoed in the empty chambers of her heart. I won't pretend it would be easy, the queen continued. You would be the first human to live among us in generations. Some would welcome you, others would doubt. But you would never face your battles alone again. Why? Mireia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Why offer this to me? Just because I saved Luca? Nara turned, her expression solemn. Because sometimes fate places people in our paths for reasons beyond our understanding. My son believes you were meant to find him, and I have learned to trust his instincts. With that, the queen moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the latch. Rest. We will speak again in the morning. Left alone once more, Mireia sipped the healing tea, her mind churning with possibilities she had never considered. Could she really stay here, among these people who were not fully people? Would she ever truly belong? The tea warmed her from within, easing the ache in her bruised arm and the tightness in her chest. Outside, a wolf howled, a lone voice soon joined by others in harmony. The sound washed over Mireia like a blessing, calling to something deep within her soul. Sleep claimed her eventually, bringing dreams of running through snow-covered forests with golden-eyed wolves at her side. Morning came with soft light filtering through frost-covered windows. Mireia woke feeling more rested than she had in months. The decision she had wrestled with through the night suddenly clear. She dressed quickly and made her way through the settlement, following the path they had taken the day before. People greeted her with cautious nods or curious stares, but none challenged her presence. She found Kieran in the great hall, deep in conversation with several advisors. He dismissed them immediately upon seeing her, his expression carefully neutral. You've made your decision, he stated, reading it in her face. Mireia nodded. I have. Before she could continue, the doors burst open, and a shifter rushed in, his face grim with urgency. My king, he gasped. The hunters have returned. More of them. With weapons and... He hesitated, glancing at Mireia. Silver chains. Kieran's expression hardened. How many? At least 20. They've surrounded the woman's cabin, and they're tracking outward from there. Mireia's blood ran cold. 20 armed men, hunting for Luca, would not stop until they found what they sought, or took revenge on the one who had helped him escape. We cannot allow them to discover Wolf's heart, one of the advisors said gravely. Nor can we hide while they threaten our borders, another countered. Kieran raised a hand, silencing them, his golden eyes fixed on Mireia. You said you had made your decision. Mireia straightened her shoulders. I have. I want to stay. A flicker of surprise crossed the king's face, followed by something that might have been relief. You understand what that means? The commitment you're making? I do, Mireia said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. But first, we need to deal with the hunters. They're looking for me as much as for Luca now. We will handle them, Kieran stated firmly. You will remain here, where it's safe. Mireia shook her head. No, I know these men. I've seen how they operate, and I know these mountains better than any of you. I've been exploring them for months while you've stayed hidden in your valley. The advisors bristled at her tone, but Kieran held up a hand, considering. What do you suggest? Let me lead them away from Wolf's Heart. Draw them into the high passes, where the avalanche risk is greatest. Your wolves can surround them there. Too dangerous, one of the advisors objected. For us, and for her. They already want me dead, Mireia pointed out. At least this way my death would mean something. No one said anything about your death, Kieran said sharply. If you truly wish to join our pack, then you will be protected as one of our own. A lump formed in Mireia's throat at the fierce certainty in his voice. How long had it been since anyone had spoken of protecting her? Since she had felt part of something greater than herself? Then let me help protect the pack in return, she insisted. Let me do this. Kieran studied her, something like respect kindling in his golden eyes. Finally, he nodded. Very well, but you will not go alone. Plans were made quickly. Mireia would return to her cabin, making her trail obvious to draw the hunters' attention. Meanwhile, Kieran's fastest wolves would circle around to cut off escape routes and herd the hunters toward the high ridge where avalanche conditions were perfect. No unnecessary killing, Kieran instructed his warriors. These men must be made an example of, but we will not lower ourselves to their level of cruelty. As preparations were underway, a small figure darted through the crowd, attaching himself to Mireya's legs. "You're staying," Lucas said, looking up at her with shining eyes. "I heard Father tell Mother. You're going to be part of our pack." Mireya knelt to his level, heart swelling at the joy in his face. "If all goes well today, yes." "It will," the boy said with absolute conviction. "Father never loses." His confidence made her smile despite the danger ahead. "I hope you're right." Luca's expression sobered. "Be careful with the bad men. They hurt more than just me." A chill ran through Mireya at his words. "What do you mean?" The boy looked down. "When they caught me, there were others. Other shifters in cages. They were sick from the wolfsbane, like me." Mireya's gaze shot to Kieran, who had overheard. The king's face darkened with fury. "This changes things," he said grimly. "If they've captured others of our kind, then we need to find out where they're keeping them," Mireya finished. "All the more reason for me to get close to them." The plan was adjusted. Mireya would not just lead the hunters away. She would allow herself to be captured, to learn what she could about their operation, and any captive shifters. "It's too risky," Nara objected when told of the new plan. "They'll kill her the moment they realize she's working with us." "Not if they think I can lead them to Luca," Mireya countered. "That's what they want. A young shifter they can exploit. They'll keep me alive as long as they believe I can give them that." The debate continued, but in the end, Mireya's determination won out. She would go, wearing a small totem of wolf's bone that would allow Kieran's wolves to track her by scent, no matter how far the hunters took her. As she prepared to leave, Nara approached her once more, something clutched in her hand. "Take this," the queen said, pressing a small knife into Mireya's palm. The blade gleamed with an unusual blue-silver sheen, iron mixed with wolfsbane. "It won't kill them, but it will slow even the strongest human long enough for you to escape if needed." Mireya accepted the blade, touched by the gesture. "Thank you." Nara's fierce eyes softened momentarily. "Return to us, Mireya. My son has already lost too much." "I will," Mireya promised, tucking the knife into her boot. The journey back to her cabin was tense, even with 4 of Kieran's best warriors escorting her part of the way. They left her at the ridge overlooking her small home, now surrounded by men with rifles and tracking equipment. "Remember," the lead warrior said before departing, "make it believable, but don't take unnecessary risks. We'll be watching." Mireya nodded, heart pounding as she began her descent. The path seemed longer than she remembered, each step carrying her closer to danger, and further from the unexpected sanctuary she had found. She was halfway down the slope when a shout went up. She had been spotted. Immediately she turned as if to flee, allowing them to give chase. The scarred man himself caught her, dragging her back to the cabin with brutal efficiency. Her struggles were not entirely feigned. His grip was painfully tight, his expression murderous. "Where is it?" he demanded, shoving her into a chair inside her own cabin. "Where's the cub?" "Gone," Mireya spat, letting her genuine dislike for the man fuel her performance. "Its pack came for it. You're too late." The man struck her, hard enough to split her lip. "You're lying. Wolves don't just come for their young. They abandon the weak." "These weren't ordinary wolves," Mireya said, tasting blood. Interest flickered in the scarred man's eyes. "You saw them shift," he guessed. "Didn't you? You saw what they really are." Mireya remained silent, letting him draw his own conclusions. "Where did they go?" he pressed, leaning closer. "Their den must be nearby. No pack stays in one place for long, especially not with hunters in the area." "I don't know," Mireya insisted. "They took the cub and left." The scarred man studied her, a calculating gleam in his eye. "But they let you live. Why would they do that, I wonder? Unless..." A slow smile spread across his face. "Unless they're coming back for you." Mireya's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't part of the plan. The man was too perceptive, connecting dots she hadn't anticipated. "Tie her up," he ordered his men. "She's our bait now. When the pack comes back for her, we'll be ready." Rough hands bound her to the chair, the ropes cutting into her wrists. The hunters transformed her cabin into an armed camp, positioning men at every window and door. Hours passed, tension mounting as daylight began to fade. Mireya's arms ached from their constrained position, but she forced herself to remain alert, watching, listening for any sign of Kieran's wolves. "They're not coming," one of the men finally said as night fell completely. "We're wasting our time." The scarred man scowled. "They'll come. These creatures are territorial and protective. They won't abandon one of their own." She's not one of them, another hunter pointed out. She's human. Is she? The scarred man mused, his gaze lingering on Mireia. I wonder. He approached her slowly, drawing a knife from his belt. There's one way to find out. Mireia tensed, fighting to keep fear from her expression. The scarred man smiled coldly, bringing the blade to her arm. Shifter blood has special properties, he explained, voice casual as if discussing the weather. It heals almost instantly. Shall we see if yours does the same? Before he could cut her, a howl pierced the night, a single mournful cry that raised goosebumps on Mireia's skin. It was answered immediately by another, then another, until the mountains seemed to vibrate with them. The hunters tensed, rifles raised toward the windows. They're here, the scarred man breathed, a gleam of triumph in his eyes. Just as I said, but Mireia knew something was wrong. The howls weren't coming from the direction of Wolf's heart. They were coming from all around them, encircling the cabin in a tightening noose of sound. And they weren't the powerful calls of adult wolves, but higher, more desperate cries. Young voices, children. The realization hit her with stunning force. Luca hadn't been the only young shifter these men had captured. There were others, being held somewhere nearby, and they were calling for help. The scarred man seemed to realize it too, his expression changing from triumph to alarm. The other specimens, he barked at his men. Check on them. Now! 2 hunters rushed out the back door. Seconds later, gunshots echoed through the night, followed by screams that were neither human nor wolf, but something in between. They're loose, a voice shouted from outside. The cubs are... The cry cut off abruptly. Chaos erupted. The howls grew louder, more frenzied. Through the window, Mireia saw shadows moving in the darkness. Small, swift shapes darting between trees, followed by larger ones. The hunters fired blindly, panic overriding training. The scarred man grabbed Mireia's bound arms, hauling her to her feet. You, he snarled, pressing his knife to her throat. You did this somehow. I've been tied up here the whole time, she pointed out, struggling to stay calm with cold steel against her skin. Doesn't matter, he growled. You're still my ticket out of here. Dragging her as a shield, he backed toward the door, shouting orders that went unheeded as his men scattered in panic. Outside, the night had transformed into a battlefield. Young shifters in half-formed states, neither fully wolf nor fully human, darted between the hunter's legs, biting and clawing with desperate strength. And behind them came the adults, massive wolves with gleaming teeth and burning golden eyes. Kieran led them, his silver coat shining in the moonlight. He spotted Mireia instantly, golden gaze locking onto the knife at her throat. The scarred man saw him too, recognized the authority in that massive form. Stay back, he shouted, or I'll cut her throat. The great wolf paused, muscles tensed for attack. Around them, the fighting continued, hunters falling one by one to claws and teeth. Mireia felt strangely calm, despite the blade pressing into her skin. She caught Kieran's eye and saw understanding flash between them. With a subtle movement, she slipped her hand into her boot, fingers closing around the hilt of Nara's knife. In one fluid motion, she drove it backward, finding flesh. The scarred man howled in pain, his grip loosening just enough. Mireia twisted free, dropping to the ground as Kieran launched himself forward, a silver blur of deadly intent. Man and wolf collided in a tangle of limbs and snarls. The scarred man fought with surprising skill, his knife slashing at Kieran's thick fur, but the alpha was faster, stronger, driven by a fury that transcended human understanding. It ended quickly. The scarred man fell beneath powerful jaws, his knife skittering away in the snow. Kieran stood over him, teeth bared in a snarl that promised death. Please, the man gasped, all bravado gone. Mercy, Kieran growled, jaws inching closer to the man's exposed throat. Wait, Mireia called, pushing herself to her feet. She approached slowly, her gaze never leaving Kieran's golden eyes. You said no unnecessary killing, remember? Make him an example as you planned. The great wolf hesitated, muscles quivering with restrained violence. For a moment, Mireia thought he would ignore her, would tear out the hunter's throat despite her plea. Then, gradually, Kieran backed away, allowing 2 of his warriors to restrain the scarred man instead. Around them, the battle was ending. The hunters who still lived were being rounded up, disarmed, and bound. The young shifters, 7 in all, none older than Luca, huddled together at the edge of the clearing, comforted by adult pack members who had shifted back to human form. Kieran himself shifted, the transformation fluid despite the wounds he had sustained. He stood before Mireia, magnificent even in his human form, blood streaking his bare chest. "You're hurt," she said, reaching instinctively toward a particularly deep gash on his shoulder. He caught her hand, his touch gentle despite the violence still evident in his eyes. "It will heal," he said, voice rough with emotion. "You saved them. All of them." Mireia looked toward the young shifters, their faces hollow with hunger and fear, yet alive. Alive because of what they had done here tonight. "What will happen to them?" she asked, nodding toward the captured hunters. Kieran's expression hardened. "They will be taken far from here, to a place where humans still respect the old laws. Their memories will be altered. They'll remember an avalanche, a tragic accident that claimed most of their companions, a warning against hunting in these mountains. And the children, they'll come home with us," Kieran said, his voice softening, "to Wolf's Heart, where they belong, where you belong now, if you still wish it." Mireia looked around at the cabin that had been her refuge in prison for so many months. It seemed smaller somehow, less significant in the face of what she had found beyond its walls. "Yes," she said, meeting Kieran's golden eyes with newfound certainty. "I wish it." Dawn broke over the mountains as they made their way back to Wolf's Heart, the rescued children cradled in the arms of adult shifters, the captured hunters bound and blindfolded to prevent them from finding the path. Luca was waiting at the entrance to the valley, having slipped away from his mother's watchful eye. When he saw Mireia, he ran to her, flinging himself into her arms with such force that she nearly fell. "You came back," he whispered against her neck, his small body trembling with relief. "I promised I would," she reminded him, holding him close. Over his silver head, her eyes met Kieran's and Nara's, standing together at the gate, the king and queen of Wolf's Heart, who had offered a lonely human woman what she had thought forever lost: a home, a purpose, a family, a pack. As the sun climbed higher, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of gold and rose, Mireia carried Luca through the gates of Wolf's Heart, leaving behind the solitude that had been her shield and shelter for so long. She had come to the mountains seeking escape, an end to the pain that had driven her from the world of humans. What she had found instead was a beginning, a new life among creatures who understood both the wildness and the warmth that lived within her heart. With her final strength, she had protected a wolf cub. By sunrise, 100 wolves had surrounded her home, and now she was one of them. If you enjoyed this story, a like or comment really helps. And if you wish to hear more tales like this one, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the next tale.